should stand up to begin with, because I have to say, Honourable First Lady, Madam President, esteemed colleagues and friends, it's great to be here. I spend a lot of my life in some difficult places. To come here, to this joyful, bright, beautiful place, great people, great friends, is simply life-enhancing. And without an occasional experience of this kind, I don't think I could carry on doing the more difficult things. So thank you very, very much for this wonderful invitation. I can now sit down on my honour. I really like the topic that you've chosen. It seems an unlikely one in this strange world we have. Why are we talking about myths when we have Donald Trump? Well, okay, there could be a logic there. Certainly we're at a time of moving tectonic plates, in every sense. Tectonic plates being the underlying structures of continents. They're moving, literally. And they're moving socially, they're moving politically, and they're moving inside us. I don't think we've even begun to grasp the moving of intellectual tectonic plates that's taking place right under our eyes and noses. So why does this make this theme important? Because ancient knowledge is important as new knowledge. Our ancestors had time to think, had a space to think, and had to think. Our ancestors confronted reality, I think, in a much more stark and clear way, had to question themselves and their own consciousnesses and competences, maybe more than we do. So the knowledge that came from that deep questioning remains relevant. Our brains have not changed. Human capacities have not changed since the great myths were made. And the myths have stories to tell us, information. Knowledge, and the best kind of knowledge, is probably knowing better what we know. The ancient Indian philosophers knew all about string theory. The Upanishads talk about aeroplanes, spaceships. Of course, they hadn't built them yet, but they'd imagined them. And they've been there in their minds. There is little that is new from that point of view. And therefore, knowledge is knowing what we know better, deeper in our consciousness. So that's why I believe it's important for this moment, this story. And I'd like to therefore begin with some myths, or indeed some beliefs in the first part. I'd like then, and they're beliefs, by the way, about music. What did our ancestors in their story making know about music? What did they know about what music makes us feel? What did they know about how music changes us? We can find out in the myths. So part one is some myths. Two, in fact. Part two is, can we test this? How, in our modern consciousness, can we test the perceptions of our ancestors? I'm going to introduce some technology, which I've been privileged to part invent, presenting it for the first time, by the way, today in public, and where we can test some of these things, maybe, and predict them. And finally, if this knowledge is useful, how can we use it in the world? How can we apply it? So 3 parts. So part 1, starting immersion and transformation, myth and belief. I'm starting not with a myth, but with a belief. I'm starting with the Nagas. They are throughout this region, from India through the whole of Southeast Asia to China. In India, the Naga is usually portrayed as a cobra. In this part of the world, as a sea or water serpent. In China, as a dragon. But they all have the same meaning. They are the guardians of the forces of nature. and they are the guardians of a certain spirituality. In this part of the world, they live deep in rivers and lakes and the seas. They live in paradises, deep, deep below everything. And from there, control the rain and the water and the forces of nature. There's a wonderful story known throughout the Buddhist world of the Naga king Mukalinda in India, who protected the Buddha. It was raining, and it was raining very, very, very hard for a long time, to the extent the Buddha was in danger of drowning. And the Naga came and protected and sheltered him for 7 days and 7 nights. This Naga is celebrated in the icons of the area. In India with a cobra, in Thailand with a number of Naga serpents, 5, 7, or 9. Maybe scholars can correct me, but that seems to be the number that occurs protecting. So multiple Nagas are protecting the Buddha. What does this mean? I believe it has a deep psychology if we compare it with myths in other parts of the world. The story of immersion, that we are deep in something that may enfold us but may also be dangerous to us. The idea that this may transform us. In the Naga stories, there are many stories of transformation. I was talking with Anatai the other night. We were talking about, the Naga who appeared as a monk in a monastery. And indeed, in some areas of belief, spiritual people have to pass through the Naga stage in order to become genuinely spiritual. So a Naga is protection, it is immersion, and it's transformation. But it's also music. It's very closely associated with music throughout the region. I remember when I ordered the first publicly owned gamelan in Scotland. We'd had private ones before. It was 1987, I think, and I contacted friends in Yogyakarta, Prasadianto, to be precise. I'm sure there are people who know him here from Yogyakarta. And in a local workshop, they made the gamelan, and they wrote to me saying, "How do you want it decorated?" And I said, "Well, decorate it as you would for a local village, please. What you would do." And I was thrilled when it arrived, and here it is, and there were the Nagas on the stands for the Kempuls, Angong, Agung, and Suwukan. 8 of them altogether, in fact, in the 2 sets. I was thrilled that we were protected by this little bit of magic. So immersion, transformation, music, Europe. The story of Arion. Arion may be a historical figure. He is credited by Herodotus and others of having invented the hymn to Dionysus, even of inventing tragedy. But the mythical Arion was a wonderful musician, a fantastic singer and player, and he went to Sicily, one of the early Greek colonies, basically to perform and earn money. He won all the competitions. He cleaned up, in the theaters and spaces and places singing, got a great deal of money. Set off back to Greece, looked for a ship, found a ship in the harbor, set off, but it was a pirate ship. And when they were out to sea, the pirates surrounded Arion and said, "Okay, we're going to kill you and take your money." So Arion said, "But I'm a musician, I have to sing my last song." So the pirates kind of laughed. "Okay, sing your last song, matey, we'll cut your throat afterwards." So he sang his song, and a dolphin, and in some cases 2 dolphins, the myth appeared. Arion jumps into the water, and on the dolphin's back is carried back to Greece. Pirates are arrested. The dolphin is honored in Corinth and is allowed to swim around the bay as long as it wants until it dies an old and natural death, which is carried, the dolphin is carried in ceremony on shoulders of many pallbearers, to Delphi, a long way to carry a dolphin. And in Delphi it's buried in the ground at the navel, the center of the earth, as the Greeks believed. And where the dolphin is buried, dolphin, delphine, Delphi, get it? And on top of where the dolphin is buried, the world's first theater was created. That's another seminar. The musical dolphin creates theater. But what's important in this myth is that it was followed up by ancient Greeks in practice and ritual, a practice that 19th century German scholars called katapontismos, using a Greek and Latin word, into the ocean. Jumping into the ocean associated with music, which meant that you would be immersed. Your consciousness and your body would be changed by this experience. You would be changed and transformed. So immersion, transformation, and with the dolphin, protection from nature, deep in our ideas about myth and music. So, does this stand up to more contemporary scrutiny? I've been making the argument about ancient knowledge. Well, let me have a go. Here is, place in a moment, this is, and by the way, to the sound engineers, this is the one that needs a bit of a boost. I'm afraid the recording came out low level. This is a person sitting with something measuring their heart rate and something measuring the conductance on their skin. When we're excited, we sweat. When we're calm, our skin is dry. And actually, it's a very, very precise measure of what's happening in our autonomic nervous system, how much tone we have in the sympathetic division, which excites us, or the parasympathetic division, which relaxes us or makes us less excited. Counter-arousal is the correct word in this case. So it unfolds from the right. This is just one person listening to Holst's Venus. And what I'd like to do is to watch what's happening to this person's autonomic nervous system. The heart rate is measured by a normal medical pulse oximeter, infrared, and the conductance by just 2 electrodes, non-invasive, on the surface of the skin, which measure the resistance between the 2 poles. So here we are. Here's a person, any person, listening to Holst. So on. Every time everyone listens to music, almost every time, unless they're on drugs or something or other, this is happening. Minute, microsecond by microsecond changes in our nervous system, our autonomic nervous system. And not just the autonomic nervous system, because that is synergetic or synergous, whichever word you prefer, with all the other systems in the body that the autonomic system doesn't reach, traveling through our blood, secretions, endocrine secretions, hormone secretions which reach receptors in other parts of the body, neurotransmitters that facilitate the messages that travel because of music, millions and millions and millions of things happening that are music. Sometimes I can tell what people have listened to. I need a bit of a clue. But if you tell me this person is listening to Beethoven, I might be able to tell you from looking at that what movement, what symphony, bit of luck. There is this extraordinary receptivity, we have transforming. This is the immersion that the ancient Greeks knew about and that the philosophers of the Naga knew about. This moment-by-moment sculpting of the inside of a human being, which can really transform that human being. It can really make them more relaxed. It can really help them concentrate and focus. It can change the way they are. And this is why things like music medicine are becoming so important. They always were. It's just that we're getting the science to be able to understand it. But this is the immersion power of music. What you see on the left-hand side is, at the bottom is a trace of what you just saw unfolding. On the top is a prediction that a system I collaborated in inventing called X-System predicted. And X-System is quite good at predicting what neurological response there'll be to music. This is important because as there are 42 million tracks in the world listened to regularly, there's no way a music therapist can sit and categorize them, but we can. We've done 9 million or so already. It doesn't take us long. And we can predict the neurophysiological effect to a certain extent. It's a point at which I'd like to make a small public tribute, if I may. And it's the next speaker, Kat Agers, who has been our neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience advisor on this, and has been wonderful because Kat always tells me the truth, never holds back on the hard facts of things, and yet is incredibly constructive and creative. And you can't ask for better than that. So thank you, if I may publicly thank you, Kat. It's wonderful to have you working with us. Anyway, one of the things Kat discovered from looking at some of our data is we're right with this about 50% of the time in moment by moment. We're much better at overall things, but moment by moment, 50% of the time. How does this immersion tool work? Of course, actually it's trying to decode how the body, deals with this immersion. Well, what we do is try to model, this is going to sound very, very pretentious, we try and model the universal musical brain. There is part of the musical brain that is very individual to us, to our culture, to our experience. It is very difficult to model. You can only ask about it. But the universal brain is very strong too. We're much more universal than we think we are. We may be coming to the end of the period where culture is seen as so very important. I believe in culture, but it's been overrated as a force. So hopefully we're into a period of universality. It's about time. So this is how we model various areas of the musical brain. This is a schematic of it. Don't worry about it too much. I'll get down to some specifics now. The next item is how we model, for example, the most primitive responses. We have in our brains the oldest part of our brain, the brainstem, which is actually an extension of the spine. It's the first brain grew out of our spine. Arthur Koestler called it the reptilian brain. That's not quite correct, but it'll do. A very old brain is very musical, capable of knowing a lot about music. First of all, it can take the most primitive survival adaptive responses. For example, bop! Thank you for blinking. Those of you that did, that is the acoustic startle effect. A sudden sound, the brainstem will send a message to the interspinal neurons that will make you jump and blink, everybody, without thinking. But then other things in the brainstem are very important. To us in our evolution, something approaching. It's been important to know. And also, going away. Or turbulence. These are very important things the brain needs to know. And music uses these things. And the brainstem detects them and sends that information to the inferior colliculus, the top of the brainstem, which then is connected to our emotional centers. It uses a neurotransmitter called gamma-aminobutyric acid, which helps to regulate the flow so we don't get too shocked by things. It tones down some of the effects of sudden sounds. But actually, this is communicating now emotional information to the brain. It's the information that a shakuhachi plays. In mode. That flow is detected in the brainstem, other places too, by the way. And Kat will be quick to correct me. Lots of things that are going up come down, efferent and afferent things going up to the amygdala from the brainstem, down again. It's not so simple, but in essence, there's that. So we detect that in turbulence, we call it, at roughly 1 hertz, 1 time a second, and 50 hertz, 50 times a second. Those seem to be the 2 bands that are most important. And then we also are careful about snakes. Not Nagas, but normal dangerous snakes. Human beings have brainstem reactions to those sounds that also affect our responses to music, where high frequencies come. So we model those 2 things. Here is an example of our modeling it. On the top, you can see the snake detection. Then you'll see 1 hertz and 50 hertz turbulence. How is energy changing in a flow that might make us feel different emotionally? The examples I've chosen are from the oldest music in the world. I have a project going on across the Andaman Sea in South India, in Pondicherry. And Sampaji, one of the greatest scholars of Sanskrit and Vedic music, is singing for us here. And you can see how our system detects his brainstem, or our potential brainstem activity. Here we go. This is a bit louder, so we don't need it quite as loud as the last example.
Adharam madhuram badanam madhuram nayanam madhuram hasitam madhuram.
Just for time's sake, you can see we're looking at the flow in that simple language thing of turbulence that affects the emotional response. Here we're modeling the auditory cortex, Heschel's gyrus. Left side of Heschel's gyrus, we think, is quite concerned with detecting fundamentals of sounds. What's the most important note? On the right side, harmonicity. How far does it conform to the harmonic series? How close is the sound to that? It's very important to human beings. And depending on how close, this sends signals to the amygdala and other emotional centers. So here we are. Here is our prediction of how Sampaji sounds on this ancient chant. I'll just go back to the slide just to show I've isolated one phrase. Om, lam, lam, lam. That's what you see. And you see the very harmonic Om with a peak towards the end, and then a low harmonicity for and then low harmonicity. And below that, sensitizing how this moves. And we can see that there's actually a few shocks with the l interrupt the flow of harmonicity. We call that harmonic cost, linear harmonic cost. Then finally, rhythm. We detect tempo, but more important is power. So what you see here is a trace of the density and power of rhythm and how that will activate the motor cortex. Very important. Very, very important thing, making us move with music. So here is a Bollywood thing. Apologies, I ripped it off of Bollywood films, so it's very boomy sounding. But it's A.R. Rahman, Chali Chaya 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 Chaya, I walk in the shadow of your love. And here is, I think, and what you see in the rhythmicity, don't expect to see the beats there, expect to see the rhythmic power, right? That's what's important. The beats are at the top. So here we go. And so on. Sorry to interrupt. So there we are. These are just some of the things that we detect in order to make a prediction. By putting the music through these filters, as it were, we can predict how those parts of the brain will be aroused, more or less. It's not perfect. We're working on it. We know nothing about, very little about the neural circuitry of Heschel's gyrus. We can't build it as a precise model, but we can build it as a black box, what we do, and we get some kind of results that stand up to scrutiny. And we can predict all kinds of reactions. This takes us down into this submersion thing, because this is by no means a complete list. It's just a few random things, but some of the, the chemicals, hormones, biochemical things, and autonomic arousal things that affect our emotions in this immersion, and this massive immersion of a human being. The water, immersion in water, metaphor for music in all cultures. And there we are, being immersed in it. Also, by the way, it helps us, the water metaphor helps us to understand music and emotion. If the ocean is music, moving from one infinitely complex state of music to another, linguists have islands. The island of happiness, the island of love, the island of hate. Music does not land on these islands. Music goes around these islands, in the waters, full of many different things, which is why music can be redeeming of love, of pain, because we don't have to land on the island. We work through a parallel emotional universe in the waters of the ocean of Catapontismus, the ocean of the Nagas, is where we experience it. So, if we have this knowledge, how can we use it? So, intervention. I was very honored to visit the princesses, Princess Kalyana Watana's Foundation for Slum Child Care. This is very significant because the princess is also the patron of this institution and founder. I have to say I work in human care situations around the world, and I have to say this is one of the most impressive I saw. I'm not saying it because I'm in Thailand. It will be pointless. It's true. Really very impressive, where the problem here for Bangkok is that a lot of populations in the country think the streets are paved with gold, and lots of people come from villages looking for work. Sometimes they find it, but not enough to live well. There isn't the accommodation, so there are poor areas. I don't like the word slum much, but there are poor areas. It was invented in Britain, and in our slums. But it's a challenging problem, and these centers take the children, they are a nursery for children, to the age of 3 to 5, to give the children a secure environment, and to also help the families take care, because there are many single parents come out of economic distress and tensions that occur in such areas. And so working with parents, them to love and care for their children, looking after the children so that mothers can go out to work. Things like that, very simple. But here also music is important. And we had a great time making some music with some of your students. Therefore, again, congratulations to the Institute. These are wonderful people, they know who they are, but they did a great job with me working with the children really proud of them. And so what does music have to do? Don't worry, I'm going to conclude soon. I know I'm running out of time. Well, here's a kind of model. It is a psychological, biological, social model, the one they use in medicine. But I think it's a very useful one for music. Clustered around biological are the things that music can do to transform people. I use this bit quite a lot in my work with traumatized children, to regulate endocrine and autonomic systems, bring them back to normal from their state. Music can regulate. Regulating breathing, very important for my kids. Processing of emotion. Intersubjectivity, learning to feel what other people feel. We're now moving towards psychobiology, between biological and psychological. Empathy, communication, of course, trust and creativity. Beyond psychological, cognitive development. Music is wonderful for this. Concentration, great. Joy, most important of all. And then self-belief. Why? Because making good music makes you believe in yourself. One of the most immediate ways. We're on to psychosocial. Self-respect, self-confidence, identity. We're on to social. Socialization, bringing children together, enjoying one another's company. Social communication, working within a group. Social coordination, working together in a group coherently. Biosocial, the one everybody forgets. Synchronization. We are made as human beings to synchronize. Music synchronizes us. Motivation, very important. Spatio-temporal awareness, not so popular in neuroscience anymore, but very important in music education, being aware of time and space through music. Fine and gross motor skills, it's obvious. Regulation of movement repertoires for our children with ADHD. There's nothing stronger than music as a corrective. In fact, I would here beg to differ with Steven Pinker, often quoted as saying, you know, music is mental cheesecake. He didn't mean that quite the same way. For Pinker, cheesecake is actually important. Strawberry cheesecake in particular is important for Pinker because what it means is his reward. Strawberry cheesecake uses ingredients to stimulate the brain, different parts and aspects, in order to give you a reward and stimulation. So when Pinker says music is cheesecake, he's not being insulting. He's saying it's creating stimulation. But I think he's wrong because where I live, in Coburn's Path, the Scottish borders, outside my window I see the beach where Darwin discovered his first theories, or evolved them, of evolution with sea creatures, where Hutton discovered the history of geology of the world outside my window. So I'm not going to be taken in by Steven Pinker and cheesecake. I believe that music is essential in our adaptive development of human beings. I think human beings develop music and musicality in order to regulate themselves and their relationships with one another, in order to communicate their inner feelings from one another in safe ways, their motivations, their intentions. Music evolved as an essential part of our human nature, and it evolved long before language. As the brainstem tells us, the capacity for music was with us long, 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 long before language. And we used it, and we developed through it. Why it remains crucial to us as a tool for change. So that's how we can change people with music in all of those ways. If we can change people, we can change societies. The Princess's Trust, the foundation of Slum Children, takes this paradigm when we use it in our musical work, which I believe you can evolve more. And if I can help in any way, I really think you can grow this. Links to cultural and education model as well, beautifully and brilliantly. And it links further to a political economic model. Politics, least interesting here, but economic important. Remember the fact that mothers need to work. In other words, from here on the left-hand side, from the magic of music and its transforming effect on children and its linking into educational, social, cultural development, we have the possibility also of political, economic change. This is a living model. It actually works. It really does. One of the few models that works in our world. Most things don't work anymore. This works. And yes, musicians, you have it. You're sitting on it. Use it, please. So, I employ this in Scotland. We don't have slums anymore. The people who lived in Glasgow slums are in those towers you can see. I think the slums are better. I'm working with communities trying to reduce what the Scottish Government sees as an attainment gap. There is a gap between high-achieving children and low-achieving children. We want to close it. How am I doing it? Like Princess Kalyani Watana's foundation, using families, society, linking care, social care with health care, education with families, and doing it through creative arts. Nothing else works. It's the only glue that works. I'm doing that there. And by the way, thank you very much for the visit, because I had some really good tips from the people, particularly how to involve families. And I'll be implementing those ideas. I will report to you how they go. I suspect they'll work very well in Scotland. Finally, in my work with refugees, I work in Lebanon and Syria, refugee communities, for an NGO called SAWA for Development and Aid. And we developed from creative arts into this kind of model. If you think of music on the left, we have developed social, cultural, educational around schools, and we're beginning to work on health and political, economic questions. How political? Well, NGOs are probably the answer to rebuilding a broken Syria. The NGO community is the only one that's in contact with itself. The international powers don't like that. They don't like the fact that I'm in contact with NGOs in Daesh and Syrian government territory. Doesn't matter. We're working with people who are capable of communicating for the common good and better good. And so, last time I was here, I ended with this slide. I'm ending with it again, because we did it. I promised last time that we would put together this, we put it together. Only one problem, we didn't have the money in the end. We have real problems with money. We are an NGO that is admired. Whenever Ban Ki-moon or Angela Merkel want to quote an NGO, they quote us. My boss, Wuba Maisen, is invited to talk, but we don't get any money from anybody. They're too busy wasting it on trashy projects that will get nowhere. They have no respect for achievement. So we have a real problem, struggle for money. I can't even open a bank account in the United Kingdom. I complained about this the last time. I still haven't opened a bank account in the United Kingdom. I'm still blocked. I've got money in the United Kingdom that I can transfer, and I can't transfer it, other than taking a suitcase, which I've done before. But it's ridiculous. However, there's a bit of good news about ASEAN. I want to finish on a piece of extremely good news. 24 hours ago, I learned that the Malaysian government's financial agency, Khazanah, which has a humanitarian wing, Yasana, has given us money for this big project for the next 6 months. So, any Malaysians here, God bless you and your country, because thank you very, very much. This will be rewarded, I promise you, somewhere or other. It is a beautiful thing to do, and you've saved a large number of thousands of desperate people who the world have just junked. They put them in the dustbin. They don't really care. They go on about it, on and on and on, and only the Malaysians have actually given us a bit of help. So a nice, for ASEAN, a beautiful note to end on, thank you very much, is thank you, Thailand, for giving us this wonderful project in the slums. Thank you for Malaysia for saving our skin. Thank you.